I want to ask you all actually about how your identity or your backgrounds informed what you're doing. You have been protesting, attending these demonstrations. Chris, I know that you come from Holocaust survivors or Holocaust fleers. Tell me about your experience in the military and as a an attaché.
Well, I did work as a British Army officer. I worked as a defense attache in the British embassies in Jordan and in Egypt. And as part of that, I was able to see the whole diplomatic scene of the Middle East. You've kept very well informed. Everybody exchanges information, and I also had the opportunity with my colleague in Israel to visit Israel and the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. And this was about 20 years ago. So obviously, everything I saw then, things are
Much.
indescribably worse now
Yeah.
than they were then. And then they were bad enough.
Mhm. Mm.
And terrible
Yeah.
things were going on then. And I was in the privileged position of being able to see that in a way that many others perhaps couldn't.
Mhm.
And it was quite clear that what was going on was a horror. And even then, that people were saying things that are being said now, in some cases being disputed now. So very senior diplomats were telling me such statements as one man said he had served previously in apartheid South Africa, and what he was seeing then, 20 years ago,
Was
was
worse.
worse than what he had encountered in South Africa.
Yeah.
Another said that without a doubt, if the United States wanted to, it could end all this with a phone call. So things that we now are hearing that in some cases are still being disputed, but that more and more people are having their eyes open to, were all there 20 years ago. But
Mhm.
I just and some of the actions that were being taken. We visited Gaza, and I just tell two little vignettes there, which were terrible, but of course as nothing compared to what's happening now. There had been an incursion the day before we went in there, and during the course of it, the bulldozer, which had been demolishing a house, drove out and just dragged its hook along the road for miles, tearing up the road as it went, for
Oh,
no other reason than that they could,
Mm.
and just to be unpleasant and nasty.
Yeah.
Of course, that is nothing that's happening now.
right.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
we also visited a hospital for severely disabled children. And a couple of days before, there'd been an incident where they were overlooked by a sniper post. And during the course of the night, one of the children who was quadriplegic called out, and the nurses ran into his room and switched the lights on. And as they entered, the snipers opened fire. We could still see there were plastic windows. They opened fire through the windows, and you could see the bullet holes in the windows because being plastic, they didn't shatter, and shot the nurse that came in, and through the nurse's body, the second nurse. And
Wow.
the director of the hospital, who was under huge stress, said to us, "We feel like chickens in the yard, and every
Mm.
now and then they can come and pluck one whenever they want."
Oh,
Wow.
disgusting.
So this was 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and even then that was going on, and now it's incomparably worse. If I could just add something just from my experience as a military officer, this year saw the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp by British forces in World War II. And although that wasn't the first camp that was liberated, others have been liberated in the East, it was the first the British forces came to. And the horrors that they encountered were then shown to the British public in newspapers. And these pictures just shocked the nation.
Mm.
And at that time, the British forces, they liberated the camp. They took immense action to try and save those who were there, many of whom could no longer be saved because they had just progressed too far, and dealing with the aftermath of the horrors that were there, as well as dealing with the perpetrators. And so the first crimes against humanity trials that took place in 1945 were held by the British
Mm.
authorities to do with Bergen-Belsen camp. And that was the 80th anniversary, which was commemorated quite considerably at the beginning of the year. And now, 80 years later, we have British forces engaged not to end a genocide, but actually supporting a genocide. And people talk a lot about the arms deliveries. The arms deliveries are fairly minor, especially compared to what's been coming out of the US and out of Germany. But there are some arms deliveries continuing. But it's also the overflights by British aircraft,
Mm.
the intelligence cooperation with the Israeli armed forces, the use of RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, which is an RAF base that's also heavily used by the US Air Force, US forces. The fact that Israeli military officers are hosted in the United Kingdom, come over here and take part in training courses, have Israeli weapons companies operating in the United Kingdom, that Britain buys Israeli weapons, that it buys training systems from the Israelis and cooperates them. All that is going on. And for me, this is just shameful that the government is misusing our armed forces in that way
Mm.
is shameful to the nation
Mm.
and
Mm.
humiliating.
Mm.
And I find it really hard to
Mm.
understand how
Mm.
this can be allowed to happen.
And
8 years
actually,
on, it was supposed to be never again, but it should be never again for anybody. I would love to see more veterans thinking about what is being done. I can see why those serving, I would like to see serving people speaking
mm,
out as well. They ought to. Every British Army and British Armed Forces member receives every year a training in international humanitarian law, Geneva Conventions,
Right.
oh,
law of armed conflict, and mandatory training has to take place. And they
hmm,
are obliged to do that, and they're obliged to abide by it. And there are international laws, such as the Genocide Convention, which really should make people speak out, refuse these orders.
mhm, mm,
Right.
But I can understand, even if I don't agree with it, why those serving
mm,
don't do so. I would like to see more veterans speaking out, and frankly, have the morality and the honor and the guts to speak up. And it is very sad they don't do so. I know more feel that way, but maybe feel that they can't speak up, but they should do.
yeah.
And I was horrified because while Naomi and Carolyn were being arrested, I was taking the easier path of being on the large 200,000
God.
demonstration that was taking place at the time and joining the other half of the Holocaust survivors and
Mm,
descendants
Oh,
who were standing there as the march went past. And as we then moved on, we came up to a very small Zionist counter demonstration.
mm,
And these counter demonstrations always, of course, have a large number of Israeli flags, but they always like flying British flags and
mhm.
England flags. And I was horrified to see that they were flying a Royal Air Force flag in amongst this.
wow.
And I thought
Mm,
this was a disgrace. Is that what the Royal Air Force wants to be associated with? Well, they are participating.
mm,
So maybe it's justified to fly it, but it is a
mm,
very sad and
Right.
shameful matter that that's the
yeah.
case.